We appreciate what has been done, but this is not enough. More needs to be done as soon as possible.
Foreign Minister, thank you so much for this availability. My question goes to the message that the Russian ambassador gave. At the end of his speech, he said that the Russian military will be in charge of peacekeeping, and they will not be softy with the violators. What can you say about that type of message, especially after the Secretary General was very clear about his concern of the use of the word peacekeeping to refer to the Russian military on the Donbas area?
I think the Secretary General should come out and say a very simple thing. Russia must stop abusing the word peacekeepers and the concept of peacekeeping.
All right, we want to go out to this shot that we have.
I think it's the time to
ahead of the meeting. We're going to listen in here live.
Back from the precipice, back towards diplomacy and dialogue. We've already said that we know that pathway is perilously narrow now, but you know me, and you know that I will always say it's not too late. And really, there is an opportunity to do the right thing tonight and to choose that path, the other pathway, and that's a path to dialogue and peace. I can only hope that this last-ditch call on the Russian Federation to do that will be heeded tonight. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. As you see, the situation seems to be serious and very serious. President of Russia took some political measures 2 days ago, but it seems to be just the beginning of an escalation. We are expecting further steps, and this is why we are about to meet tonight. Earlier today, President Macron spoke to President Zelensky of Ukraine. He reiterated our full support to Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity, so we'll stand with the people of Ukraine. As far as Security Council is concerned, we'll continue to monitor the situation closely. We are about to take action with a draft resolution condemning what's happening in the next days. So we'll get back to you, and we will share our deep concerns tonight in the Security Council. And I'm afraid this is not the end of this story.
The resolution be put to a vote. Do you have a day?
So the Irish and French ambassadors speaking out ahead of this emergency UN Security Council meeting. We have a bit of breaking news that we want to report to you that we haven't brought to you yet fully here. We're getting in tweets that flights by civil aircraft are now being restricted inside of Ukraine, that they're diverting some of the flights, routing around Ukraine. This is a substantial development, as airspace is always of concern with looming conflict here. Back out to the shot where the UN Security Council meeting will be taking place in the next 8 minutes or so. We have a slate already slotted for us, as we'll be listening in to all of the representatives from around the globe, including representatives from Russia who are currently chairing the meeting. So many developments to come out of this, as we've been reporting on the latest news in and around Ukraine, recent deployment of troops from the U.S., Baltic regions to Poland, but also Russian troops being sent to Ukrainian borders and pushing closer and closer, according to satellite images and reporting from there down on the ground. We have our outer look of the capital of Kyiv, which we've been flashing to you through the last couple of weeks here. We also have Maidan Square in Ukraine, seemingly peaceful tonight, which has been the way it has been the past several weeks. But things could change, things could escalate when Putin decides to move here. We've been getting reporting from Fox's Trey Yingst, as he's been telling us that people in and around Ukraine are already gearing up They know things are escalating. They know that war could be upon them soon. Here's the latest from Trey.
A cyber attack brings down Ukrainian bank and government websites. Shortly after, a bomb threat is called into the country's parliament. Analysts say Russia's hybrid conflict is underway as Ukraine braces for war.
It's only me and our army who will be aware of these clear steps that our army will take to ensure defense capacity and security of our country. And believe me, we are ready for everything.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called for a state of emergency this afternoon. The Ukrainian parliament approved the request, sending the country into a heightened state of readiness, allowing for increased document checks by police, banning mass gatherings, and giving officials the option to implement a curfew. Ukrainian lawmakers also voted today to allow for civilians to carry firearms.
I support the territorial defense. I am even considering joining them, even though I'm not that young anymore. If needed, I will join them. I'm going to stay in Kiev. This is our land, our country.
Satellite images released overnight show more Russian troops staging within miles of the Ukrainian border, as reports indicate an offensive is imminent. Already, the Ukrainian army is getting hit hard by Russian-backed separatists who now have the Russian military in their territory for support. At least one Ukrainian soldier was killed today and 6 others wounded amid continued shellings. If the conflict expands in the coming hours or days, experts say there could be 50,000 Ukrainian civilian casualties. The population remains united amid this possibility. And tonight, the Ukrainian foreign minister is requesting an urgent UN Security Council meeting in Kiev. Trey Yingst, Fox News.
And back out live to where that UN Security Council meeting will be getting underway here just momentarily. But we do want to bring some new information to us coming down from Marco Rubio. He says the Russian invasion of Ukraine is now underway. Here are some things to expect in the coming hours. There will be strikes on air defense systems. There will be moves to cut off Kyiv from eastern Ukraine. Moves to cut off Ukraine's military forces on the line of contact in the east to prevent them from falling back to defend Kyiv. This is all expected in the coming hours here. And as we've been reporting, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying on NBC News tonight he believes Russia will invade Ukraine before the night is over, and that was a few hours ago. So things are definitely escalating. Things are definitely picking up, and you can feel it in the energy of these global ambassadors as they come together. We heard briefly from the ambassadors in Ireland and in France as well. Taking you out to another shot where the Russian ambassador is now making his way into the council meeting, the Security Council meeting. Ironically, he will be chairing the meeting tonight. So back to inside as we are just minutes away. As we've been reporting, an invasion underway. A full-scale invasion to come within the hours here. President Biden enacting new sanctions on Russia today, although it does not seem like any of those sanctions are making a major difference here. As we just reported to you minutes ago, civil aircraft now restricted inside of Ukraine, that coming down just within the past couple of minutes. Many of those flights that were heading over Ukraine airspace now being shifted and having to fly in opposite directions because of concerns of possible invasion. So it seems as though most of the ambassadors have made their way into the room now and will be speaking about the matters. They held a Security Council meeting earlier this morning, also last night for us as well. saying that diplomacy is still on the table, although many are saying it's too late. It might be too late for peace talks to be on the table still. President Zelensky, as we've been reporting throughout the evening here, giving an address to Ukrainians, saying he wants to maintain peace. But if peace is not the aim from Russia, that they will not fight with their backs, their faces will be seen. They will come full force, and they are prepared to put their foot in the ground and fight back when it comes to aggressions from Russia. So as we reported to you before, we've got a couple of tweets coming in from U.S. representatives, Marco Rubio, saying the Russian invasion of Ukraine is now underway. And this is not a new statement. This has been said over the past couple of days, but a real sense of energy just within the last couple of hours here. And Blinken confirming that on NBC News tonight, that we could have a full-on invasion before the night is over. According to Google Maps, there's also a traffic jam from locations in Russia to the Ukrainian border, starting exactly where there was a Russian formation of armor that showed up yesterday. So someone is on the move. Things are on the move. Troops are on the move. Troops closing in on the Ukrainian border, as Kyiv has been the main focus throughout this whole invasion opportunity for Russia here. And bringing back another tweet from Marco Rubio. As I was telling you just minutes ago, he says, in the hours to come, Russia will conduct strikes on air defense systems, move to cut off Kyiv from eastern Ukraine, move to cut off Ukraine's military forces on the line of contact in the east to prevent them from falling back to defend Kyiv. So this all coming in from our own representative, Marco Rubio, at this moment in time. So back out to the UN Security Council emergency meeting that has been called after a massive address from President Zelensky of Ukraine to the people of Ukraine. And we'll be taking it for you in full here on Live Now from Fox, live, raw, and unfiltered. Stay with us. So once again, live, raw, and unfiltered here on Live Now from Fox as we are awaiting this emergency meeting regarding the Russian invasion and an imminent invasion. Some saying it is happening right now. I want to bring in foreign policy expert Michael Santo. He joins us here on the line. Michael, thank you so much. So we're seeing all of the ambassadors walk in. We just saw the ambassador of Russia come in. This is going to start any moment here. Expectations on the conversation that will follow.
Oh, it's going to be hostile. The Russians are going to be belligerent, and that's the way they've been for the last week. And I would be shocked, unfortunately, if it changes. So it's going to be very hostile. Fortunately, there's vast majority of countries are supporting our side, the right side, against this Russian military aggression. But the Russians are being shamelessly belligerent and hostile, and that's what we're going to see. I can virtually guarantee it.
So, Michael, we've been reporting that these civil flights have been suspended for now. What does that mean?
Very possibly imminent massive Russian air operations. I am afraid to give a false glimmer of hope. Clearly, it's very scary. So, I mean, certainly if Russia's strategy was mostly still to scare the Ukrainians and half the world, that would be the way to do it. But the level of military operations to mobilize half of the Russian ground combat forces within miles of Ukraine, naval ships deployed to the Black Sea, as well as...
All right, Michael, I got to cut you off here. It
Yeah.
does look like the meeting is beginning. We'll catch up with you in just a little bit.
Okay.
От 28 февраля 2014 года на имя председателя Совета Безопасности С-2014-136. Повестка дня утверждается. На основании правила 37 временных правил процедуры Совета я приглашаю принять участие в данном заседании представителей Германии и Украины. Решение принимается. На основании правила я также приветствую на сегодняшнем заседании генерального секретаря Организации Объединенных Наций Антонио Гутерреша. В заседании также примет участие на основании 39 временных правил процедуры Совета заместитель генерального секретаря по политическим вопросам и вопросам миростроительства госпожа Розмари де Карло. Сейчас Совет Безопасности приступит к рассмотрению пункта 2 повестки дня. Я хотел бы приветствовать его превосходительство генерального секретаря Антонио Гутерреша и предоставить ему слово.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, Excellencies, I want to reaffirm what I expressed this morning in the meeting of the General Assembly. But of course, it wouldn't make any sense to bother you reading again the same text that I'm sure you are all aware of. In between, during the day, a number of events took place, and with your permission, Mr. President, I would like to ask Ms. Rosemary Di Carlo to be able to brief you on those events. But simultaneously, the day was full of rumors and indications that an offensive against the Ukraine was imminent. In the recent past, there were several situations with similar indications, similar rumors. And I never believed in them, convinced that nothing serious would happen. I was wrong. And I would like not to be wrong again today. So, if indeed an operation is being prepared, I have only one thing to say from the bottom of my heart. President Putin, stop your troops from attacking the Ukraine. Give peace a chance. Too many people have already died. Thank you, Mr. President.
Я благодарю генерального секретаря за его вступительные замечания. И сейчас я предоставляю слово госпоже Розмари де Карло.
Thank you, Mr. President. Earlier today, the so-called authorities of the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics requested military assistance from the Russian Federation. Also today, the Ukrainian authorities declared a nationwide state of emergency and announced other related defense and security measures, including the mobilization of reservists. Throughout the day, we've seen disturbing reports of continued heavy shelling across the contact line and civilian and military casualties. There are also reports of the repeated targeting of civilian infrastructure. This evening, different media are carrying reports of an ongoing large-scale military buildup and on military columns moving towards Ukraine. The Russian Federation has also reportedly shut airspace to civilian aircraft near the border with Ukraine. The United Nations cannot verify any of these reports, but if these developments were confirmed, they would greatly aggravate an already dangerous situation. The Ukrainian authorities are also reporting a new large-scale cyber attack targeting several state and financial institutions. Mr. President, President Zelensky earlier this evening called for continued diplomacy. Separately, President Putin also spoke about his continued readiness to engage in dialogue. We encourage such efforts, even at this late hour. UN staff remain on the ground to provide humanitarian assistance to the people of Ukraine. We are committed to staying and delivering. All parties must ensure their safety and security. Respect for international humanitarian law and international human rights law is also paramount. We cannot predict exactly what will happen in the coming hours and days in Ukraine. What is clear is the unacceptably high cost in human suffering and destruction of an escalation. The people of Ukraine want peace, and I'm certain the people of Russia want peace. We must do everything in our power to ensure that peace prevails. Thank you, Mr. President.
Я благодарю госпожу Ди Карло за ее брифинг и сейчас предоставляю слово тем членам Совета, которые хотели бы выступить с заявлениями. И первым предоставляю слово представителю Албании.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, this is the fourth time the Council is meeting in Ukraine in a matter of weeks. Every time we meet, reality on the ground confirms bit by bit what some of us have been anticipating. Russia has been saying one thing and doing its contrary. We were told troops were retreating when they only have increased. We were told to stop hysteria since troops were in Russian territory. No longer, they are invading a neighbor unprovoked with false pretexts, false narratives, and fabricated news. Every development unfolding in the last 48 hours confirms to us and to the world that Russian worries have nothing to do with its security, that its anxieties are not linked to NATO enlargement, that this issue is not a confrontation between Russia and the West. This is a confrontation between Russia and international law, the UN Charter that it deliberately has chosen to ignore, a confrontation between a hegemonistic vision and the rules-based world order. Dear colleagues, it's not about Russia's concern, it's about Russia's appetite. The Ukrainians are facing another aggression just because they dare to exist, because they have chosen to be independent, because they have opted for democracy. Dear colleagues, this is a dark hour not only for Ukraine, but for the entire international community as we witness with trepidation the progression of a pure act of aggression carefully planned and cold-bloodedly being executed. We called and hoped for a back down of the Russian Federation from this senseless, destructive and self-destructive action. We repeat the same call for Russia to stop, to reflect, to reverse its illegal decisions, to withdraw from this senseless madness, to de-escalate, not to push towards precipice. Several mechanisms are in place and various proposals have been made, including by President Zelensky, whose calls remain unanswered. Diplomacy is like hope, it dies last. But for it to work, it must be seized, not ignored, as the Secretary General just called for here. We call on the fellow members of the Security Council to rally in support of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Russia has been warned repeatedly that they will be alone in this foolishness, that they will be responsible for the innocent lives lost, including Russians maybe, and for the destruction caused in the heart of Europe in the 21st century. If they choose to continue to execute their plans, as everything indicates, they will bear not only the consequences of the war, but also the historical blame and shame of invading a neighboring country when its responsibility as a big country, as a permanent member of the Security Council, calls for it to work and help preserve peace and security, not to torpedo it. We reiterate our support to Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally organized borders and territorial waters. In concluding, I welcome the presence of the permanent representative of Ukraine to this meeting. I would like to convey to him, to the Ukrainian government and people, that at this most critical moment in their history, they are not alone, and we stand firm in full solidarity with them for their rights to be free and choose who they want to be. I thank you.
Я благодарю представителя Албании за его заявление и сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Соединенных Штатов.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Secretary General. Thank you for your strong stance and your powerful remarks today at the General Assembly and for your remarks tonight. Colleagues, a few moments ago, I spoke to President Biden, who asked me to convey in the strongest possible terms his and our steadfast support for Ukraine and support for the urgent meeting this Council has convened tonight. Furthermore, he asked me to share that the United States and our allies and partners will continue to respond to Russia's actions with unity, with clarity, and with conviction. We are here tonight because we believe, along with Ukraine, that a full-scale further invasion into Ukraine by Russia is imminent. Tonight, we're seeing the Russians close airspace, move troops into Donbass, and move forces into combat-ready positions. This is a perilous moment, and we're here for one reason and one reason only: to ask Russia to stop, return to your borders, send your troops and your tanks and your planes back to their barracks and hangars, and send your diplomats to the negotiating table. Back away from the brink before it is too late. Last week, the United States informed this Council and the world about what we expected to see unfold. We said that Russia would manufacture a pretext for an attack. We have since seen numerous false flag events staged along the lines of contact in Donbass. We said Russia would theatrically convene emergency meetings at the highest levels of the Russian government. We all saw this on Monday with the state televised Security Council meeting held by President Putin, an orchestrated moment in which the Russian government decided to recognize as, and I quote, independent states, unquote, sovereign territory of Ukraine controlled by Russia's proxies since 2014. They literally violated Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity on live television before the world. We said that false proclamations would come declaring Russia would need to defend Russian speakers in Ukraine. We got that and much more from President Putin's speech on Monday and during the speech of the Russian ambassador in the General Assembly today. No one could have predicted just how dangerous, inciting, and far-reaching President Putin's speech would be, with Putin arguing for taking the world back in time to an era of empires and colonies. Finally, we said the attack would come next, that we could expect communications to be jammed, cyber attacks to shut down key Ukrainian institutions. Last week, we attributed to Russia denial of service attacks against Ukrainian banks, and we saw similar activity this morning targeting government sites as well. And in the last few hours, we have received very concerning reports of destructive malware placed on hundreds of computers and executed on at least some. After that, we said would come the bombs and missiles, the soldiers and the tanks. Already soldiers have been deployed to the occupied region of Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here tonight because we believe the rest is imminent. Now, over the past few weeks, Russia has called our predictions hysterical. Russia said we were lying. Russia said we were supplying the world with misinformation. Russia's diplomats even laughed in the face of the human suffering we were sounding the alarm about. But what we said would happen has come to pass for all the world to see. So let us be clear. All parties are not culpable here. There's no middle ground. Calling for both sides to de-escalate only gives Russia a pass. Russia is the aggressor here. Russia's attack on Ukraine is tantamount to an attack on the UN and every member state in the chamber tonight. The Security Council is charged with adjudicating threats to peace and security. Russia is bypassing it entirely and taking matters into its own hands. And that undermines the institution. It undermines everyone who participates in it. The United States, Ukraine, its allies, and partners across Europe, UN officials, every other member of the Security Council, we have all repeatedly implored Russia to engage at the diplomatic table. Those calls were not heard. Instead, tonight, Russia has brought its people, the Ukrainian people, and the world to the brink of a conflict that will produce an untold amount of human suffering. I said it in the General Assembly this morning, and I'll say it again tonight. Everyday Russians should be asking themselves right now how many Russian lives Putin will sacrifice for his cynical ambitions. Responsible members of this Security Council will stand together, and we will stand with Ukraine. And we will do so despite a reckless, irresponsible, permanent member of the Security Council abusing its powers to attack its neighbor and subvert the UN and our international system. This morning in the General Assembly, we saw dozens of leaders from across the globe stand up to defend the UN Charter and Ukraine against Russia's brazen attacks. We were proud to stand with them. Today, I had the opportunity to meet with Ukrainian Foreign Minister Kuleba. And many of you were in the General Assembly Hall this morning when Foreign Minister Kuleba received enthusiastic and overwhelming applause after his remarks. Since he could not be here this evening, I would like to conclude by echoing his words. This morning, he warned us all that, quote, no one will be able to sit out this crisis if President Putin decides that he can move forward with this aggression against Ukraine. Your governments and your people will face painful consequences together with our government and our people, unquote. He is right. History tells us that. And we must confront this threat head on in this council, in the UN, and in our capitals. The people of Ukraine are counting on us. Let's not let them down. Thank you, Mr. President.
Я благодарю представителя Соединенных Штатов за ее заявление.
Okay, and with that, we want to bring to you a bit of breaking news that we're getting from the White House right now. Press Secretary Jen Psaki saying the president is closely monitoring the developments in Ukraine, and he will continue receiving regular updates from Jake Sullivan, his national security advisor. He also spoke with his UN ambassador, Linda Thomas Greenfield. You just heard from her before this meeting tonight. Again, this is an emergency meeting that is going on with ambassadors around the world. And we're hearing new information about possible cyber attacks that are going on, specifically with Ukrainian banks, state and local institutions. That's what's being reported as of this moment. It's already a nationwide state of emergency in Ukraine at this time. I want to bring in foreign policy expert Michael Santo. We're just going to talk for a second here, and then we'll get right back into the remarks at that emergency meeting. But how substantial are these updates here in that this is not just imminent anymore? This feels like it's going on now.
This is a really historic, in a scary way, moment for all of us in our life, because this is a quasi-confrontation between the two nuclear superpowers, and there really, truly are only two. And, we're not going to defend Ukraine. We can't afford to because of the dangers involved. It's not a NATO member. We're not committed. Years ago, we said that we wouldn't necessarily. But this is an event, unfortunately, of enormous historic significance. It's undoing basically the peaceful transition after the Soviet Union, the peaceful efforts of Gorbachev and Reagan. And in some ways, it's undoing the Helsinki process that we launched with the Soviets in 1975. This is a huge, very dangerous moment that we're watching right now because, hopefully it works out for good, but I can't overstate how dangerous the situation is right now.
Right. Soldiers already being deployed to Ukraine at this time, and further attacks are soon, is what we're hearing from our U.S. ambassador, also the Secretary General in the beginning, pleading with Putin to stop troops from invading Ukraine. Could anything come of these pleas?
I think it shows the huge significance and how terrible this moment is for Europe, the world, and America. It could completely transform our world into a very dangerous situation, like some of the worst times during the Cold War, even like the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Euro Missile Crisis. I think it's very dangerous, actually. I think that our only hope to stop this is somebody in Russian society, government or military, is able to talk sense into Putin and stop him and say, the future for Russia is economics and technology, not war. And here's why I think it's really dangerous. If you study his pattern over 22 years, even when he's prime minister, I think this is what he always wanted to do, to basically rebuild the stature and power, military power of the Soviet Union. And I'm afraid that his calculation is this is the peak of Russian military power. It's only going to go down. So this is his chance to undermine the world order that heroic people like Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, Mikhail Gorbachev, and Shevardnadze, the foreign minister of Soviet Union, worked so hard to create a peaceful future for Europe and the world, where Europe would not be divided by an iron curtain and Russia wouldn't be at war with Western Europe and the United States. And he wants to undo it. He wants to refight the Cold War. And he's shown that it's not always cold for him. His contractors attacked our forces in Syria in February 2018. Unfortunately, we could have clashes here because I think that Putin is an incredibly dangerous, hardcore KGB personality. And I think that's what we're seeing unfolding. Unless somebody stops him, they're going to conquer Ukraine. And it could be very, very ugly, right. I'm afraid to say.
I do want to cut you off here for a second, Michael, because we're getting in that President Putin is speaking live on Russian state TV right now, and he has said that they have decided to launch a special military action in Donbass right now. So that is a very, very substantial statement from President Putin amid this emergency meeting with UN ambassadors.
Now, I will say that we crossed the point of danger zone if and when, and unfortunately appears it's imminent, Russian tanks start to encircle Kiev, that they go quite a bit farther than Donbas. And there seems to be this very costly, massive buildup to do something massive that could involve cruise missiles and airstrikes against major Ukrainian cities. This special military operation that Putin is ostensibly announcing is more of a add-on rather than massive escalation. Unfortunately, all signs from U.S. intelligence and satellite pictures suggest that as soon as in the next few hours we could see something massive, and the cost in Ukrainian and Russian lives could be terrible. So it's a very dangerous situation, and it could be an immense human tragedy unfold in Ukraine for Russians and Ukrainians.
Okay, foreign policy expert Michael Santo joining us here on the line. We're going to get back into this Security Council meeting as it still is underway. We'll hear from the ambassador of France.
Ukrainian people conveyed by President Zelensky in his address to the Russian nation a few hours ago. Ukrainians want peace. They want a relationship of good neighborliness with Russia, mirroring the family and personal relationships which bind to so many Russians and Ukrainians. The international community, Mr. President, has made its voice heard, its united voice, today at the General Assembly. It is that of respect of the Charter of the United Nations, the peaceful settlement of disputes, that of diplomacy. It echoes the clear declarations of the Secretary General. Once again, we call on the Russian Federation to follow this path, to draw back on its decision to recognize separatist entities of eastern Ukraine and to call its soldiers back. We call each of the members of this council to act responsibly and to resolutely support all initiatives to prevent and put an end to violations of the Charter of the United Nations. If Russia confirms that its choice is war, it will have to take all of the responsibility and pay the price. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ireland.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'd like to thank the Secretary General and Under Secretary General De Carlo for their very sobering remarks at the beginning of our meeting. Mr. President, tonight as we gather at this table, we are staring into the abyss of a major conflict in Europe, a conflict that would have major global implications. Tonight, the core principles of this United Nations, in which we believe, are under attack. In Ireland, we know the importance of the rules-based international order. We know the importance of respecting the voice and integrity of all countries, big or small. Most fundamentally, we know the value of peace. We believe that one state threatening and using lethal force against another to get its way or to expand its territory is no solution. Ireland has a deep understanding, informed by our history, that dialogue and respect resolve disputes. Tonight, this drives our solidarity with Ukraine. It is our collective responsibility, indeed our obligation here at this table, to maintain international peace and security, nothing less. That means we stand up for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of every member state of the United Nations. Let's be clear, the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine have not changed. The decision by Russia to recognize as independent entities the non-government controlled areas of Donetsk and Luhansk regions of Ukraine does not change those borders one iota. They did not change in 2014, and they have not changed this week. We urge the Russian Federation to reverse this decision immediately. We urge the Russian Federation to refrain from further escalatory unilateral actions which can only serve to further deepen this crisis. Tonight, the path for diplomacy, the path for dialogue that we have called on for so long is perilously narrow. The principles of the UN Charter we hold dear have already been breached. These principles now risk being further violated. This is the time to show courage, the courage and the time now to pull back from the precipice, the time to return to dialogue and to diplomacy. The use of military aggression has no place in our modern world. Have we learned absolutely nothing from our history? These United Nations rose from the ashes of 2 world wars. The senseless destruction of that era was born of a belief that military might makes right. This philosophy, applied with modern weaponry, would unleash devastation and human suffering, affecting millions of innocent people. Tonight, we stand with the people of Ukraine. Tonight, we stand with the UN Charter. We stand with those who, even in this dark hour, still have the courage and hope to bring us back from this precipice. A resort to military conquest for one state to impose its will unilaterally against another, to annex part of its territory, has absolutely no place in the 21st century. There is still a choice to turn from the path of war to the path of diplomacy and dialogue. Mr. President, it is never too late to make the right choice. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ireland for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of India.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me begin by thanking Secretary General for his briefing on the evolving situation in the eastern regions of Ukraine. The Security Council had met 2 days ago and discussed the situation. We had called for urgent de-escalation of tensions and emphasized on sustained and focused diplomacy to address all issues concerning the situation. However, we note with regret that the calls of the international community to give time to the recent initiatives undertaken by parties to diffuse tensions were not heeded too. The situation is in danger of spiraling into a major crisis. We express our deep concern over the developments which, if not handled carefully, may well undermine the peace and security of the region. We call for immediate de-escalation and for refraining from any further action that could contribute to a worsening of the situation. We call on all parties to exert greater efforts to bridge divergent interests. I would like to underline that the legitimate security interests of all parties should be fully taken into account. India has consistently advocated at the United Nations the need for peaceful settlement of disputes in accordance with international law and with agreements entered into by parties concerned. I underline once again that more than 20,000 Indian nationals, including students, are located in different parts of Ukraine, including in its border areas. We are facilitating the return of all Indian nationals, including students, as may be required. We believe that the solution lies in sustained diplomatic dialogue between the concerned parties. In the meantime, we strongly emphasize the vital need for all sides to maintain international peace and security by exercising the utmost restraint. I thank you.
I thank the representative of India for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
سيد الرئيس، أود بداية أن أشكر الأمين العام ووكيلة الأمين العام على مداخلاتهما. اجتماعنا هذا هو الاجتماع الرابع الذي يعقده مجلس الأمن حول أوكرانيا.
Mr. President, this is the fourth meeting held by the Council on Ukraine in this month. In light of the recent developments,
أخذت بلادي موقفا يتمثل في الدعوة إلى خفض التصعيد
In light of the recent and alarming tensions, my country has taken a firm position calling for de-escalation and efforts to find a peaceful solution to the crisis between the concerned parties. In this context, we would like to point out the following. First, we affirm the importance of engaging in dialogue in good faith while intensifying diplomatic efforts at all levels to support the opportunities of peace on the basis of international law. We reiterate the Minsk agreements still constitute a good basis for reaching a peaceful solution to the crisis and maintaining regional and international security and stability. Second, we stress the importance of adherence to the principles of international law and the Charter of the United Nations, particularly in settling international disputes through peaceful means and respecting the sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity of states. Adherence to these principles and compliance with the Charter of the United Nations constitute a central pillar in finding a sustainable and peaceful solution to the current crisis. Third, we reiterate that the crisis in eastern Ukraine could exacerbate the critical conditions of the civil.
All right, this is Andrew Kraft here, and we have been listening in to this emergency session of the UN's Security Council. Right now, the UN ambassador there from the UAE speaking. So this is going to be going on for some time. We're going to show you as much as we can of it, but we also want to bring in some of our guests tonight. We're going to be having on national security experts, foreign policy experts, cybersecurity experts, historians, academics, and reporters, breaking down everything that has been going on just in the last about hour or so, as we have been getting in new developments almost by the minute here about the situation on the ground in eastern Ukraine. Right now, though, I'm being joined by John Dermody. He's a former deputy legal advisor for the National Security Council and a former attorney at Homeland Security. John, thanks for being with us. I wanted to get your first reactions because literally as we speak, Vladimir Putin is making an address on Russian state television, and he said, quote, what appears to be a warning to the United States, quote, a couple of words for those who would be tempted to intervene. Russia will respond immediately, and you will have consequences that you never have had before in your history. Now, does that mean whatever we do, we've already put in sanctions? Could there be some kind of cyber counter response? Is that what Putin's intimating here?
Look, I think there's no doubt that we are sort of in a crisis posture. And if I would sort of echo the words of the U.S. ambassador to the UN, that no one can sit out this crisis. So certainly those are big words and trying to sort of set the table and deter potential action by the U.S. and its allies. I think it's very unclear, actually, about what could potentially happen in response to U.S. sanctions and other activities that the United States and its allies might take to try to prevent and deter the Russian action in this area.
John, earlier we know that a large-scale denial of service attack, which can render a website unavailable for some hours, hit Ukraine's security agency, its legislature, its foreign affairs ministry, and other agencies earlier today. Now, U.S. officials couldn't confirm specifically that it was Russia, but they were speaking as if they know or will know soon that, yes, in fact, it was Russia. What do you make of that, especially as this crisis grows, that, you know, this invasion is happening as we speak in the eastern part of the country? What are those cyber attacks and what are they going to look like in Ukraine, do you think?
So in addition to that DDoS attack that you mentioned, there's been some initial reporting that cybersecurity researchers have identified sort of other malicious malware implanted on Ukrainian systems, sort of wiper malware that would entirely sort of eliminate some of the data on computers and other sort of networks. So in some ways, a increase in the type of weapon that might be used there. In some ways, also an echo back to 2017 of the NotPetya attack that involved Russia, again, sort of using Ukraine as a testing ground for some of its cyber capabilities. And, you know, we'll see how things sort of develop. But I would point out that with NotPetya in 2017, you know, that was an action that had spillover well beyond Ukraine's borders and caused billions of dollars of damage to companies around the world. And so I think that's one of the concerns that I know the cybersecurity officials and national security officials in the U.S. government, at least, are concerned about. You know, how quickly does this type of event escalate? And particularly with cyber, where you know, sovereignty and geography aren't as important in some ways as sort of traditional military activity. You could see actions and effects happening well across the world and outside of Ukraine.
John, that leads me kind of to my next point, and I don't want to be too theoretical here, but, you know, does there need to be more of a cohesion between public and private sector here in the United States to build up and shore up defenses on cyber in the event that there is some type of attack or onslaught by Russia, and not just Russia, but other nefarious actors as well? Are you confident in that bridge? Is there a bridge right now between the public and the private?
So I think you make a very good point there, that there has been an evolution over the last you know, almost decade, that the threat that is being posed by sort of foreign nation states, and certainly in the world of cyber, has evolved from you know, targeting government systems. And to sort of pull an example from a mentor of mine, you know, the plans for the F-35, the classified plans or something else like that, to broadening out to looking at the personnel files of government officials, even now to sort of looking at the documents and files and data of companies throughout the United States. So I think there's a couple things happening there. One, there's a much bigger sort of integration of technology across our society, and that results in having potential significant impacts to a country and to the ability to apply sort of significant pressure, political pressure against a country, even if you're not targeting sort of the government systems themselves. And so you can look to an example like Colonial Pipeline that shut down sort of activity across the Eastern Seaboard and caused mass confusion. And so I think because of that, you're seeing the government sort of change postures and trying to do the best that they can to sort of integrate and harmonize their activities with the private sector. And you've seen that with a lot of collaborative relationships in the prior administration, and certainly in this administration, led by CISA, NSA, and the sort of the National Cyber Director's Office out of the White House.
John, though, and you were talking about critical infrastructure, not only in Ukraine, but here at home. You know, when do you think such cyber actions will be kind of, you know, codified into international law that could be, you know, tantamount to an invasion, to war? A lot of this is done sub rosa. A lot of the counter responses as well, we don't really see that they're classified, that they strike back, you know, tenfold, they being the United States, to whatever malicious actor. When does this all kind of get out in the open?
So you've identified one of the core challenges of trying to conduct statecraft when you're dealing with cyber. The lines in the sand just aren't clear. There hasn't been a history and certainly public examples of types of activities that different nation states would consider to be, you know, across the line. You know, I certainly think that there have been sort of clear communications and statements at international bodies like the UN that if you are, you know, attacking and going after sort of core critical functions, including potentially some aspects of critical infrastructure, that might be something that would be tantamount to an invasion or a violation of sovereignty. but it's really difficult to sort of identify where those lines are when so much of it is happening, one, outside of the public eye that you can't really see what's happening, and two, some of it is happening not necessarily by state actors, but by proxies or criminal threat actors that are acting either at the behest or, with the sort of wink and a nod by various nation states.
John, just lastly, what are you going to be looking for, especially on the cyber front, as we go into the next 24 hours in Ukraine? We're already getting reports that some communication lines have been taken offline, we know that basically civil aircraft are restricted from flying in all of Ukrainian airspace. But especially on the cyber front, what do you think they're going to go after next?
I mean, the Russians have incredible capabilities in this area and have used them in the past. So I would anticipate sort of full-scale knocking down of systems in Ukraine. I don't think that sort of direct attack is the type of thing that would be, at this point, levied against those nations that are critical of Russian actions, like the United States. However, I do think that the activities in Ukraine are increasing the overall sort of threat posture for any sort of entity that's operating in some of the countries that are critical of Ukraine. So what you may see there is not necessarily sort of state action, the GRU or someone else firing off malware or something like that, but you may see sort of loosening of the reins on cyber threat actors, criminal cyber threat actors, ransomware purveyors, and that type of thing. And that could potentially create sort of a real threat for private sector companies that are just sort of wanting to sit this out and see what's happening. But, again, going back to what the U.S. ambassador to the UN said, no one's going to be able to sit on the sidelines of this.
John Dermody, we appreciate your time and your expertise into this, and we'll no doubt be speaking again in the next couple of days, I'm sure.
My pleasure.
All right. Right now, though, we do have a new shot that just popped up of Russian President Vladimir Putin on Russian state TV giving an address right now. You can see we have some video of it. Of course, it is all in Russian. I will do my best. We're getting right now some of these translations, and I'm going to read for you what Putin is saying to his people. I'm going to be reading some of the quotes from the speech from start to finish. Right now, Putin, like I said before, has said he has declared a special military operation in eastern Ukraine in the Donbas region. He says, quote, "A couple of words for those who would be tempted to intervene. Russia will respond immediately, and you will have consequences that you never have had before in your history." He says, "Our analysis has concluded that our confrontation with these forces, these Ukrainian forces, is inevitable." He says, quote, "We have to preserve Russia and Russian territorial integrity." So right now we are showing you video of what is going out on the airwaves in Russia right now on state television by President Putin. Putin announcing a special military operation in the Donbas. He says, quote, "I am counting on unity of the government. The fate of Russia is in credible hands of our multinational country." Right now, we're getting more and more quotes from this speech. It is, of course, in Russian. He says about NATO expansion, quote, "For U.S. and its allies, it is so-called Russia deterrence policy. For our country, it is an existential issue." He says, quote, "Ukraine is having modern foreign weaponry pumped into it. This is an existential threat to our Russian statehood, our sovereignty." He says, quote, "We cannot tolerate the threat that emanates from modern Russia." So right now we are working to get more and more statements and comments about what Vladimir Putin is saying there. That is coming to us from some of the translators and transcripts we have here at Fox as we continue to cover this. Of course, the UN Security Council meeting still ongoing. The Ghanaian ambassador to the United Nations right now is speaking on the dais there. We are also tracking afterwards, after this meeting is concluded, if they will come out and make statements. Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the U.S. ambassador, did that on Monday night, and we hope she will do the same. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
And political independence of Ukraine in line with the core tenets of the United Nations Charter. Kenya is deeply concerned by the rapid escalation of the conflict risks following the recognition of Donetsk and Luhansk as independent states by the Russian Federation and the continued military escalation. We are concerned that there is a serious risk that a conflict enveloping the whole of the Donbas region will occur, present trends holding. Such a development would instantly lead to significant loss of life, a humanitarian crisis, and the large-scale population movement of refugees and internally displaced people. Kenya urgently calls for calm by all parties and their commitment to protecting civilians and civilian objects from any actions contrary to international law and international humanitarian law. We continue to believe that there is still an opportunity for diplomacy to produce a solution to this dangerous crisis. The required diplomatic steps should seek, in the short term, for a de-escalation of the situation and the limiting of all military maneuvers to prevent sparking a wider conflict. For this to happen, there must also be a stated commitment to negotiations between NATO and the Russian Federation in the middle and long term. Such a commitment will need the vision to design a viable security architecture for Europe that protects the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of Ukraine and other states, while being sensitive to the concerns of all relevant parties. Mr. President, we want to believe that this chamber, in light of its storied past, retains the wisdom and wherewithal to prevent a catastrophic war. We have confidence that the United Nations Charter, embraced as a whole, protects Ukraine and all countries, not only those with modest military means, but also the world's nuclear powers. When we consider the recent past of wars undertaken by choice, and when the Charter and international law were breached, eventually the safety and security of all parties was tragically undermined. Mr. President, the membership of this chamber was fundamentally shaped by the states that emerged victorious from World War II. In doing so, the Charter bestowed on them a special responsibility that reflected the sacrifices they had made to defeat a unique evil to mankind. We believe that the leaders who designed today's multilateral system were profoundly humbled by the catastrophic war they had survived. So much so that they were inspired to erect the sovereign.
Okay, this is Andrew Kraft back here. We've been listening to the Kenya ambassador to the United Nations right now, in addition to many other ambassadors around the table there. As we continue to cover all the latest, we are learning that President Biden will speak tomorrow. He just issued a statement on Russia's unprovoked and unjustified attack on Ukraine. I'm going to read it in part. It says, quote, "The prayers of the entire world are with the people of Ukraine tonight as they suffer an unprovoked and unjustified attack by Russian military forces. President Putin has chosen a premeditated war that will bring a catastrophic loss of life and human suffering. Russia alone is responsible for the death and destruction this attack will bring, and the United States and its allies and partners will respond in a united and decisive way. The world will hold Russia accountable." Of course, this UN Security Council meeting still ongoing at this point in time. I want to bring in one of our national security experts, friend of the program, Hal Kempfer, to respond to all of this latest news that seemingly is just breaking each and every minute here. Hal, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Andrew, for having me on. There's a lot to talk about.
There's a lot to talk about. It's a very fluid situation. Right now, I want to put up a tweet from Fox News correspondent Jennifer Griffin, and she says, quote, "A U.S. official tells me right now we're seeing the pre-assault fires. Expect this to go on for a few hours. Land attack to follow with all of the full forces Putin has arrayed. Explosions heard in Kyiv, Odessa, Mariupol. It has begun." We're also getting reports from Fox News correspondent Trey Yingst, who is in Kyiv. He said explosions in Kyiv. Of course, right now it's about 5:30 in the morning there. We have a LiveNOW look in Maidan Square. Hal, your reactions, we've been talking about this now for seemingly almost a month. It is here.
It is here, and what we're seeing are, whether you call them pre-assault fires, and that's perfectly acceptable military language, or preparatory fires prior to going in, we're seeing attacked fires all over. Now, the interesting thing is Odessa, that kind of indicates to me possible naval fires. Could be missile fires, could potentially involve naval gunfire, but that's what that kind of indicates, and that's interesting. That is showing that they're going in deep. They're hitting targets all over the country. Obviously, Kyiv, which is the capital city. Those are, and keep in mind, we only have so much information. Those are probably missile fires. They may be followed up with airstrikes. Part of what that does, though, even if you don't have ground forces going all the way down to Kyiv, for example, what that does is it fixes Ukrainian forces around the country in place. You're not going to shift your forces to the east if you're afraid that they're coming from the south and the north as well. And that's what it appears is happening. You know, certainly from a military planning standpoint, that would be a logical thing to do, to use those fires. They have the capability. So to use those fires. Also, tremendous psychological impact on the citizenry and the political leaders, and also the military leaders as well in those areas. When they get hit with fires, it slows down their ability to react. It slows down, the ability to evacuate people, because they don't know if they want to get on the road because they could become targets of fire. So there's a lot of reasons why they would do this.
Hal, I wanted to get your thoughts as well. We had a very moving, stirring, and poignant speech today by the Ukrainian President Zelensky. Some of it, a majority of it, was in Russian. This was a speech not only to Ukrainians, but to Russians as well across the border, urging for peace. We also got the news today that Zelensky essentially called the Kremlin, requesting to speak with Putin. It went unanswered. It was denied. We're also learning about an hour ago that there is a flight restriction in all of Ukraine for civilian aircraft. And we have been tracking some of the flight tracking websites, and there are no planes over the country of Ukraine. It was entirely clear of air traffic. Is that normal? And of course, does that spark fears as well that any wrong move could down a passenger airliner like we saw back in 2014?
Well, Andrew, part of it is psychological, obviously. It impacts a lot of different ways. The snub of the phone call is to be expected. There's really nothing more for them to talk about. Obviously, Putin has made up his mind. The confusion with the head of the Russian security service and with the U.S. ambassador, or with the Russian ambassador to the U.S. this weekend, indicated to me that Putin is keeping very close counsel, that some of his key members of his cabinet and those around him may not even know what he's thinking at any given time, which is also an indication of a lot of strong operational security on his end to avoid any leaks. And there has been a lot of information coming out. It's tough to say if some of that's not deliberate by Russia, but that's part of what we're seeing there. Now, shutting down the airspace, that's just prudent. That's anytime you have a large military air operation, the Ukrainian Air Force wants freedom of operations, and obviously the Russian Air Force wants freedom of operation. So even if it wasn't announced de facto, you'd want to shut it down. I think both sides, after seeing what happened with the airliner being shut down, would go to extremes to make sure that there were no civilian airliners or any civilian aircraft, because frankly, whatever's flying right now is a target by one side or the other. So they're freeing up that. Same thing with the notice to mariners in the Black Sea and certainly the Sea of Azov, where they're trying to make sure there's no mariners out there. You're going to see a lot of maritime action. I am fully expecting to see an amphibious assault. If it doesn't happen in the next few hours, it could happen the next day, but I'm fully expecting to see that simply because they have the capability. The Marines are embarked on ship, from what I understand. So I would expect that they would do something, if nothing more than to throw uncertainty into the planning process of the Ukrainians and also achieve a certain element of surprise to throw them off balance and to fix their forces in place. At some point, the Ukrainians will figure out where the main thrust, where the main effort is of the Russian forces. Are they going for the entire country? Are they going for certain parts of the eastern Ukraine? Could a lot of this be hit everywhere, make it look like they're coming everywhere, and in the end, they simply seize that southeastern quadrant of Ukraine? We don't know. That's a very likely scenario. I would say it's a probable scenario. But that doesn't mean that they wouldn't launch missiles on all these other cities as well, just to sow confusion, and of course to basically immobilize the movement of Russian forces from one theater of action to another.
Hell yeah. And back to your point about amphibious assaults, we are seeing some reports as well of explosions in the port city of Mariupol. We're also getting more and more of this translation from the Russian president, Putin, who was literally speaking. I think he's still speaking, Hal, while we are speaking. And I want to read a quote that was just translated. He says, "A couple of words for those who would be tempted to intervene. Russia will respond immediately, and you will have consequences that you never have had before in your history." That is threatening language to maybe the United States, European allies, anyone who wants to get in the way of Vladimir Putin.
Well, they're engaging in psychological operations and disinformation against the West. They're trying to stop us from doing something more concerted. The big fear that Russia has in this is not that they're going to get stopped cold at the border. If the Ukrainian forces are prepared, and I believe they are prepared, their strategy will be to basically trade terrain for kinetic kills. They're going to gradually pull back their forces. They're going to move from battle position to battle position to battle position, and they're going to use the terrain to their advantage, try to inflict as much battle damage, as many casualties as possible on the Russians' part. One of the vulnerabilities, the biggest vulnerability the Russians have is they've got somewhere between 2/3 to 75% of their operational ground combat units already committed. There really isn't some big strategic reserve that they can pull in. Now, if they attack everywhere, and maybe they're using the fires, and at the same time they're doing a shift to come into another area, that's very possible. We did that during Desert Storm, did the famous hook movement where we actually had everybody fixed in place, and then we maneuvered around and came into Kuwait. Well, that could be something they're thinking about as well. But with that said, there's just a lot of different possibilities going on in terms of the whole thinking, and we're going to find out over time.
Yeah. Hal, earlier today during the Pentagon press briefing, 80% of forces have moved into ready positions. That was earlier today. The bulk of that 80% are obviously on the ground. They also say we have believed Putin has assembled 100% of his aviation assets, 100% of his maritime assets, and near 100% of his ground, very close to 100%. Hal, stay with us right now. The Russian ambassador to the United Nations is speaking yet again, and I believe we're about to hear from the Ukrainian ambassador to the United Nations as well. Hal, be on standby for us. Thanks.
Okay.
The whole people, without distinction of race, creed, or color, the whole people living in that territory. End of quote. Today's government in Ukraine simply is not that. And the tragedy in Ukraine started indeed after the illegal coup in Maidan in 2014, when, rather than dialogue with the Russian-speaking citizens of Ukraine, the new authorities brandished guns and airplanes at them. Information and testimony to this end is more than sufficient. However, our Western colleagues prefer not to notice this. We tried yesterday and today, before yesterday, to explain to you the logic of the decision made by Russia to recognize the LPR and DPR. And we focused on the need to ensure peace and security there. However, you didn't want to hear this, and you don't want to hear it now. For you, those living in the Donbass are simply pawns in a geopolitical game focused on weakening Russia and promoting the bloc from NATO to its borders. For us, these people are women, children, the elderly, who for 8 years have been cowering from Ukraine's shelling and provocations. For us, these are Ukraine people and not the Maidan authorities. In this is the difference in our approaches. If you do not change the geopolitical lens, you will never understand us. Then, those on whose behalf this decision I mentioned was made, who you've not even thought about for over these 8 years, simply calling them pro-Russian separatists and terrorists. Those people are the most important for us. I'd like to say once again that the root of today's crisis around Ukraine is the actions of Ukraine itself, who for many years were sabotaging its obligations under the Minsk package of measures. Last week, even, there was a hope that Kiev would rethink and nevertheless implement what it signed up to do in 2015. For this, first and foremost, they needed direct dialogue with Donetsk and Lugansk. However, further confirmation that Ukraine is not ready for this type of dialogue and steps to grant Donbass special status as set forth in the Minsk agreements, while
Руководство ЛНР и ДНР обратилось к нам с просьбой оказать военную поддержку.
Inasmuch as I already said, the Ukrainian provocation against those in Donbass not only has not stopped, but has intensified. The leaders of the LPR and the DPR turned to us with a request to provide military support in line with bilateral cooperation agreements as agreed at the same time as they were recognition. This is a logical step, which is a consequence of the actions of the Ukrainian regime. During this meeting, the President of Russia, Putin spoke with and said that he made a decision for a special military operation in the Donbass. We don't know all the details today, but briefly I would like to inform you that from his statement it says that the occupation of Ukraine is not in our plans. The aim of this special operation is to protect the people who for over 8 years have been suffering genocide from the Kiev regime, and for this we will aim to demilitarize and de-genocide in Ukraine, and also support those and hold accountable those who carried out so many crimes against civilians, including citizens of the Russian Federation. This decision was made in line with Article 51 of the UN Charter and the sanction of the Russian Federation and fulfilling the agreement on and recognition of the LPR and DPR. We're receiving a lot of information and we will analyze this and we will keep you up to speed with this. Now I resume my function as President of the Council and I give the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Okay, right now the Ukrainian ambassador to the United Nations will be making a statement as his country is under an invasion.
Distinguished members of the Security Council, Secretary General, Under-Secretary, before I try to deliver parts of the statement that I came here with tonight, most of it is already useless since 10 p.m. New York time. I would like to cite Article 4 of the UN Charter, and it says, membership in the United Nations is open to all other peace-loving states which accept the obligations contained in the present Charter and in the judgment of the organization are able and willing to carry out these obligations. Russia is not able to carry out any of the obligations. The ambassador of the Russian Federation 3 minutes ago confirmed that his president declared a war on my country. So before I read parts of my statement, I would like to avail of the presence of the Secretary General and request the Secretary General to distribute among the members of the Security Council and the members of the General Assembly the legal memos by the Legal Council of the United Nations dated December 1991, and in particular the legal memo dated 19th of December 1991, the one that we've been trying to get out of the Secretariat for a very long time and we were denied to get it. The Article 4, Paragraph 2 of the Charter reads, the admission of any such state to membership in the United Nations will be affected by a decision of the General Assembly upon the recommendation of the Security Council. Mr. Secretary General, please instruct the Secretariat to distribute among the members of the Security Council and the members of the General Assembly a decision by the Security Council dated December 1991 that recommends that the Russian Federation can be a member of this organization, as well as a decision by the General Assembly dated December 1991, where General Assembly welcomes the Russian Federation to this organization. It would be a miracle if the Secretariat is able to produce such decisions. There is nothing in the Charter of the United Nations about continuity as a sneaky way to get into the organization. So when I was coming here an hour ago or so, I was intending to ask the Russian ambassador to confirm on the record that the Russian troops will not start firing at Ukrainians today and go ahead with the offensive. It became useless 48 minutes ago. Because about 48 minutes ago, your president declared the war on Ukraine. So now I would like to ask the ambassador of the Russian Federation to say on the record that at this very moment, your troops do not shell and bomb Ukrainian cities, that your troops do not move in the territory of Ukraine. You have a smartphone, you can call Lavrov right now. We can make a pause to let you go out and call him. If you are not in a position to give an affirmative answer, the Russian Federation ought to relinquish responsibilities of the President of the Security Council, pass these responsibilities on to a legitimate member of the Security Council, a member that is respectful of the Charter, and I ask the members of the Security Council to convene an emergency meeting immediately and consider all necessary draft decisions to stop the war. Because it's too late, my dear colleagues, to speak about de-escalation. Too late. The Russian president declared the war on the record. Should I play the video of your president? Ambassador, shall I do that right now, or you can confirm it? Do not interrupt me, please. Thank you.
Then don't ask me questions when you are speaking. Proceed with your statement.
Anyway, you declared the war. It is the responsibility of this body to stop the war. So I call on every one of you to do everything possible to stop the war. Or should I play the video with your president declaring the war? Thank you very much.
Again, I must say that I thank the representative of Ukraine for his statement, and the questions, I wasn't planning to answer them because I've already said all I know at this point. Waking up Minister Lavrov at this time is not something I plan to do. You said the information that we have will be something we provide. And this isn't called a war, this is called a special military operation in the Donbass. I now give the floor to the representative of Germany.
Mr. President, we meet at the very moment of a military escalation we have not experienced in Europe for over a generation's time. The President of the Russian Federation announced a military operation on Ukrainian territory. We condemn this in the strongest possible terms. And we call upon all members of the Security Council and the United Nations to now stand up for Ukraine and against a shameless breach of international law. 2 days ago, Russia's decision to recognize the self-proclaimed so-called People's Republics of Donetsk and Luhansk was harshly rejected in this Council. It had already dealt a devastating blow to the principles and the international order that the United Nations stand for. Russia has not listened, and it turns out it was not prepared to listen. It has continued its massive military buildup, and we observed and observe cyber attacks directed against Ukraine, and now Russian military is moving into Ukrainian territory. By the actions and this unprovoked military operation, Russia is violating the core principles of the UN Charter. We condemn the use of force against innocent people and the violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine in the strongest possible terms. We urge Russia to terminate its military action against Ukraine immediately and withdraw its troops. Mr. President, our thoughts are with the Ukrainian people. We will be steadfast in our support for Ukraine and our support for the UN Charter. The Russian aggression will come at an unprecedented price politically, economically, and morally. Mr. President, France, Ukraine, and my country stood ready for diplomacy, for another meeting in the Normandy format, or for the summit that Ukraine had proposed. With our allies and partners, we called on Russia to seek a diplomatic way forward in vain. Now is the moment to speak up and defend the international order of the UN Charter against unilateral aggression, jointly and decisively. Tonight we stand with Ukraine, and we are doing so unwavering and determined. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Germany for her statement. And now I give the floor to the United States, who wish to make a further statement.
Thank you. In my remarks tonight, I said that we predicted Russia's false flag attacks, the misinformation, the theatrical emergency meetings, and the cyber attacks. But one piece had not come to pass. Unfortunately, while we've been meeting in the Security Council tonight, it appears that President Putin has ordered that last step. At the exact time as we are gathered in the Council seeking peace, Putin delivered a message of war in total disdain for the responsibility of this Council. This is a grave emergency. The Council will need to act, and we will put a resolution on the table tomorrow. As President Biden said tonight, Russia alone is responsible for the death and destruction this attack will bring, and the United States and our allies and partners will respond in a united and decisive way. The world will hold Russia accountable. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement. I'd now like to give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom, who asked to make a further statement.
Thank you. As we sat in this chamber urging Russia to step back, President Putin announced special military operations on Ukrainian territory. This is unprovoked and unjustified. This is a grave day for Ukraine and for the principles of the United Nations. We and our partners have been clear that there will be consequences for Russia's actions. We fully support the United States call for a UN Security Council resolution. This Council must do all it can to stop the war and uphold the Charter. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom, and now I'll give the floor to the representative of Albania, who also wished to make a further statement.
Dear colleagues, we could not end this meeting that what we had feared and anticipated since days is happening. Explosions are reported in Kiev and in several other cities in Ukraine. Masks are finally down and tanks are in. As we speak, Russia is implementing its plan and attacking a neighbor to whom it has decided to deny existence, freedom, the land, dignity, and life. We call on all the members of the United Nations to rally in support of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, to stand with Ukraine and its people, to condemn firmly and unequivocally this aggression, to stand for peace, for rules, for international law, and take whatever measures they deem necessary to show the aggressor that its actions will bear consequences. Let me reiterate, Russia will be held responsible for the consequences of an unprovoked war, for the loss of human lives, for causing unbearable human pain, and for opting for destruction when we need development, for bringing death where we aspire for need, for hope, for choosing to become an outlaw when we need cooperation. Russia will bear historical blame and shame and the consequences of invading a neighboring country and attempting to destroy European security. Let's unite and make sure it will not succeed.
Final words there from the Albanian ambassador to the United Nations. We also just heard from both representatives from the United States and the United Kingdom as they wanted to add more to their statement after the final statement from the Ukrainian ambassador, essentially saying that while this meeting has been going on, the invasion has started and is happening right now. We're getting reports from some of our sources who have family and friends in Ukraine right now that there have been reports of explosions in Kyiv, Russian airborne troops near Odessa, and a battle near Kharkiv. Right now, we want to bring in Hal Kempfer, who we have been relying on so much throughout the duration of this as we continue to monitor these developments right now. Hal, thanks for being with us. I just want to put up yet a new live look that we have gotten. Hal, this is out of the port city of Mariupol there on the Black Sea, I believe. Right now, it is almost, I believe, 7 in the morning on the dot. Excuse me, almost 6 in the morning on the dot in Ukraine. Hal, just your thoughts listening in to the emergency council there. We just lost that shot. We do have our live look out of Kyiv right now. Hal, your thoughts about what was said in the Security Council meeting, essentially the United States and the United Kingdom having to update their statements because during the meeting itself, the invasion is ongoing.
Andrew, it was interesting. All the ambassadors, particularly the Ukraine ambassador, had to update their statements because, frankly, what they were going to say had become overcome by events. The invasion is on. I might point out that loss of signal could be a cyber attack by the Russians. That would make sense. If you're dropping airborne troops, paratroopers, airborne units, as has been reported, along the Black Sea in Ukraine, you don't drop those units unless you know that they're going to be linking up with ground units in the very near future. So if they're seeing paratroopers coming in along the Black Sea, then they're going to be linking up with something, whether that's a mechanized, high-speed mechanized assault, moving up some major roads in order to link up with them, which would be a rather risky move, or potentially linking up with maritime, I should say, amphibious forces, which would seem to me to be a little bit more likely. If you recall back in Normandy, that we dropped airborne divisions behind the beaches of Normandy, and then they linked up, and they actually fought their way back to the coast and linked up with the forces that came ashore. That's a time-proven methodology in terms of amphibious warfare. That could be what we're seeing on the Black Sea. That would be consistent with all the reporting. That would certainly be consistent with what I've thought they were going to do all along. And so of all the reports coming out, that one about paratroopers or airborne forces is the one that really catches my eye, because that says that there's some sort of major operation happening in the south. And if it is the south, and if it's further to the west, that also changes some assumptions, because if they plan to stay there, then we're not just talking about that southeast quadrant that runs along the Sea of Azov. Now we're talking about if they're doing something that's going further west with all these other attacks and doing a major amphibious assault, that indicates that they may be looking at sweeping along the south and then shooting north. And again, from an operational, from a tactical standpoint, that would make a lot of sense. If that's what their goal was, to take over the entire country. I don't want to get too far ahead of what we know, because the reporting is very limited in terms of that information. But that could be an indicator of what their full intent is. The next thing is to look to see if all the feeds from the northern cities start disappearing as well. And with everything now, cyber attacks are just part and parcel of warfare. That's just part of what you do. Taking communications out as well.
Yeah, Hal, I just want to update our viewers. There have been some statements from officials. We do know now that the Security Council meeting has concluded. Actually, let's wait on that. They're stepping up to the podium to make some statements. Let's listen in.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is the third time in a row that Russian presidency has not allowed us to speak under the Rule 37. And so, as PR of Estonia, I am delivering this statement here on behalf of the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania,